and just kind of um, continue on with where we left off. Now I'm going to give a assignment for this class, for this typography class, and I'm working with Carly right now uh, with doing a editorial layout for a magazine, and it's a really cool article for that. I think it would be a really good typography assignment. So details to come on that assignment. In the meantime, you've got a bunch of stuff you're going to be doing for the logos and branding class. So we'll concentrate on that for now, and then I'll throw in a typography class assignment for this for this course. But I kind of left off at talking about one of my introductory lectures in typography, which was just a lot of terminology and things. And I want to wrap that up today, just get that finished and get that sunk into, your heads in terms of a lot of the general rules of typography. A lot of times they're in lots of books, but I don't know how much that's stressed these days in graphic design, and it really should be, especially in courses. So I will continue on with that and finish that up, and also yeah, it's just really weird. I've got this camera here, and I'm looking at the camera, but I see your faces over here, and I want to look at your faces, but otherwise, if I do this, then you're looking at me, not looking at you. So anyway, okay, so let's continue on. I'm going to share my screen. Share the computer audio with this too, and go over here to kind of what we're going to talk about today. And I had put this list up of things that I wanted to accomplish in the first lecture, which we never got around to. I didn't think we would, and then we got caught up in a little diversion in the next class, where I showed some John McWade videos from lynda.com. And right after I posted those, I thought, ooh, I'm posting them to YouTube. I wonder if they're gonna get me on that. And sure enough, the minute I uploaded it, I got a red flag from YouTube saying that, aha, we have a client that's contesting your upload. So I didn't think it would go in. And, I thought I just wrote it off and say, oh, well, at least you guys were here and at least you saw it. But for you, Daniel, I thought you weren't here, so I wanted you to see those videos. And lo and behold, a few minutes later, it's up on YouTube and it's playing. So I don't know what the deal is. I mean, have you guys ever experienced that, where they block you and then all of a sudden it goes through? So anyway, I don't know. I'm kind of expecting a notification from them saying that they're going to take it down. Or maybe they're waiting for me to take it down. I don't know. But anyway, it got through. So it's up there. And those 3 videos, Daniel, that we showed were just kind of techniques that John McWade talked about in terms of typography and making, kind of a simple museum list of names more attractive and reading better, and a lot of typography principles were in that. So check that out. Okay, check that video out. That would have been from our last class in typography. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with the concept of alignment, and I'm going to open up this InDesign file here that I've been using as a demo. But alignment is, something that we do all the time. We know what it is. We have align left, we have centered, we have justified, and flush right, or align right. We used to call it flush left, ragged right. That used to be the traditional terminology of the setting, flush left and ragged right, because the right side of the column of body copy would always depend on how many words were in that line. And the breaks that you got here were all dependent on the words that you used. And as you adjusted the break, you would see different white space happening here on the right side. Now, let me start off by saying that the align left or flush left, ragged right setting is the most preferred setting for readability. And when I talk about readability, when I say readability, I mean the speed of reading. There's two things. There's two concepts of typography. One is legibility and one is readability. Readability is just simply the ease at which you can read text. And it also incorporates comprehension. Like, we can read stuff, but did we understand what we read? And that has a lot to do with readability. So when we are concerned with readability, and as designers we're very concerned about, getting the message across, we're also concerned about whether they understood what they read. Now, a lot of understanding what you read has to do with your comprehension of the English language and your vocabulary. Do you understand the words? Do you know what they mean? So in that sense, I'm not talking about, the intellectual part of it. But what I am talking about is just being able to read a paragraph and go, yeah, I get it. I understand what they're saying. Legibility, on the other hand, deals with the actual art form of the letters, the actual design of the letter form. And obviously there are letter forms that are easier to read than others. Script has always been a very difficult letter form to read. So we avoid using script with heavy body copy. Like this section right here, we would never set in script, nor would we set this in any kind of fanciful face like Old English or Zap Chancery or any of those typefaces. Yeah, they're kind of neat, they're stylish, but they're very illegible in mass. So we usually go with very legible faces, and the most legible face that you usually see in small body copy is a serif face, like a Times Roman. So legibility and readability have a lot to do with, our getting the message across. So in terms of alignment, when we talk about the align left or flush left, ragged right setting, it is easiest to read because the word spacing is consistent within each word. We have the same amount of spacing between each word. And what that does is that allows us to maintain a good flow when we're reading text. And that's how we read text. We read it and we flow with it. Once you get past, let's say, well, I don't want to say fifth grade, sixth grade, maybe. But after that, we should be reading words together. So is one word. We scan it. We don't read is in the. When you're in second grade and you're learning how to read, you go, the ball is in the box, right? Every single word you read. But as an adult, we start scanning and we start reading groups of words. And these are all, very important for designers to know because, it's all about typography. And so when we are reading that way, it's very important that word spacing is consistent. And when word spacing is consistent, we read faster. So that's why that's one the probably the most positive point of pro of setting flush left, ragged right. Now the con of setting ragged right is that we do get this kind of spacing, and there's really nothing we can do about this because it all depends on how many words are in a line and how many characters per word and so forth. Now you know how computers work, that when you get to the end of a line and your next word is longer than the amount of space that you've allotted for that line length, it's going to automatically break that word to the next line. So sometimes it puts a hyphenation in that word, but normally with InDesign, the hyphenation threshold is probably two lines in a row. So anything more than 2 lines in a row, it's not going to hyphenate the word, it's going to just break it. And you can set that tolerance in InDesign to make it less than 2 lines, or even no hyphenations whatsoever. I mean, I've worked for designers that say, I don't want any hyphenations in any line. Well, that's going to cause a lot of irregular white space here. Now, whether that's important or not, it all depends on the situation that you're setting text. For instance, when we look at this text box here, and I'm going to make this text box maybe a little bit shorter, okay, and we can see this big gaping white space right here. That's because actually this is the end of a paragraph. And so at the end of a paragraph, it's always going to break to the next line. But in here, we have what's called a stair step. And this is just what's being caused by the amount of words that are in each line. And this might not seem to be that big of a deal. In fact, let me turn the guides off. Okay, when we see this like that, but the minute we have another column next to this, and I'm going to duplicate this off and put another column here. Okay, now that white space gets really accentuated. Now our eye goes there. Okay, why? Is because we have this big block of gray matter here up against this, and all we see is the white space in between. So that's what's not preferable. So aesthetically, using the align left or flush left, ragged right setting with columns next to each other is going to give you this kind of, irregular white space. So what do you see this situation in? You see this in, possibly websites, but more so in magazines, newspapers, textbooks, things like that, where, you're using columns of text. So what is the cure for that? Well, the cure for that sometimes is, let me back out of this, is to justify. I'm going to highlight this and go to a justified setting over here, and that flushes out the column both left and right. So you might see something like this in magazines and newspapers. Of course, you would have justified setting over here too. Now what this does is this enables columns of text to look very neat and orderly in mass. So if you looked at the entire front page of the New York Times, you would see justified columns of text, and it would seem very organized, and the layout would seem to be, nice. However, when you are actually reading, the way justification works is it varies the word spacing between different words in order for it to justify out that line. And you can see that happening quite a bit, quite obviously here, where we have this big word spacing here, but then we get down here to this line here, and I'm using placeholder copy so you can't read it really, and you see very short or small word spacing here. Lots of word spacing here, but not much here. And that's exactly how the computer figures out how to justify text. But when we back out and we look at it, from a distance, everything looks nice and organized and readable. So I guess the question is then, when should we use justified text versus flush left text? There's a trade-off. One looks better, but the other one reads better and reads faster. So you might ask, well, why did the New York Times, do that? I mean, isn't stuff in the newspaper important to them? And yes, it is, but they did that because the trade-off to them, and I'm going to try and emulate here a newspaper column, of text, okay, where you'll see a situation that looks like this, maybe 3 columns across. And what they say is that the trade-off between the word spacing is, you know, there is acceptable to the overall look of the page when you back out and you see the whole page. What's important is that you find the article, you find the headline, you see the article, and you go to it, and you will read through, you know, bad word spacing. At least that's what the justification is. But in other things like car brochures or high-end publications, the flush left, ragged right is really preferred, and a lot of designers tend to want to use that. Justification kind of is not really looked highly upon in the design field in corporate graphics. It's kind of a necessary evil, if you will, for magazines and newspapers. Okay, so those are the two alignment. Let me get on the text tool here. The alignment things that we use mostly. Flush left, ragged right being the easiest to read, and then the next easiest to read will be the justified setting. Get rid of this, and open this up here. And then go on to the third alignment category, which is centered. And with centered, we know what centered is. Centered is just taking a block of text and finding the center of the extreme measure of the text, bringing in a guide, let's say, and finding center, and then it's the exact same distance from this central access point. And that's what the computer is doing. The computer is literally just centering it off of a central access point. Now, center type is something that you do not see in textbooks and newspapers and anything with any kind of amount of text. You rarely see centered alignment. Centered alignment is very difficult to read, and so let's talk about why these alignments are easier to read and harder to read. Well, one of the things we know from flush left, ragged right is that the word spacing is consistent. That makes that easier to read. Another thing, which I failed to mention, and let me just go back and make this flush left, is that we have a hard left edge to the block of text. And the way we read, at least in this country, in English and other languages, and Japanese read up and down, right to left, believe it or not. It's the exact opposite. Is we read left to right, and as our eyes scan across the line of text, when we get to the end, our eyes kick back, and then we read the next line. And that's where leading is important. Okay, you have to have the correct amount of leading proportionally in order for that process to work. We talked about that when we were talking about leading. But what's easiest about this setting is that the starting point is always at the same point. Okay, again, if I bring a line over, there's the starting point to every single line. And that makes the rhythm of reading easy. As our eyes go across, we kick back to that same point right there. Now, in the centered alignment, you can see now that this beginning point of each line is at a different spot. So as we read across, our eyes have to kick back here, and then here, and then here, and here. And so you can see that it slows down the process of reading because our eyes are having to make that adjustment. That is the number one reason why centered type is harder to read, you know, when you have a lot of it. Now you might say, well, I see a lot of centered headlines and, you know, billboards, you know, things are centered and large type. And that's true, because when you only have a few lines of type and the type is very large, then centered is no harder to read than a line left or a line right or whatever. It's only harder to read when you have lots of copy. So when we're dealing with body copy, we're rarely centering text. Unless, of course, what you're doing is something that is, for instance, like a menu. Okay, you go into a fancy restaurant and a menu might be centered because the centered alignment is considered very formal, and formal is something that a lot of, higher end restaurants want to project. So they will center their text down the line. Like if you go into a French restaurant and you get the wine list, okay, I guarantee you it'll be centered, and the type will probably be maybe even script or italic or something, because again, it's that formal feel. But in most cases, we're not centering body text because it's just harder to read, and it also creates some very unusual white space between the paragraphs. This is the end of a paragraph, and so we have this gaping white space in between here and here, and that's where your eye goes. Okay, remember, your eye always goes to the negative space, especially trapped white space. But it does have a purpose, and usually the purpose of centering is for larger text. And it does have that formal feel. So it doesn't mean that don't use it. Okay, the last alignment is that at least we're going to talk about is the flush right, or align right alignment. Now the align right alignment is a very unique alignment that is used very sparingly. Again, we would not set a block of copy align right because it's very difficult to read, in the sense that, again, the starting point of each line varies from place to place, and that makes scanning and rhythm and reading quickly difficult. We also have, the raggedness of the left edge, which causes the same problems as the flush left, ragged right, in that we have, different white space situations happening on the left side as opposed to the right side. But align right, again, is an okay alignment if it's used, in large headlines. Sometimes we want to use align right, but here's where align right comes into play a lot. Let me give you an example here. Now this is way too much copy to use as a caption, but let's say we had a photograph, and I'm going to delete some of this stuff here, and I'm going to make this Minion Pro italic, which a lot of times we see captions in, and I'm going to shorten the line length of this block of text. Okay, so let's say this is a caption to a photograph, and I'm just going to draw a box here and indicate this as, let's say, a photograph. Just fill this with a tone here. Okay, so imagine this being a photograph and this being the caption. Well, you know that this belongs to this because it's flush right. It's almost leaning in to this photo. So it's showing you that, well, this belongs to this. Now, here's a situation where, let's say you had two instances of this, and I'm going to try and oops, yeah. I know why. I'm on my direct selection tool. Okay. Let me just make this smaller here. Do the same thing. I'm going to take this photo and I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to take this caption here, duplicate this off and stick it over here. Let me just move this over a bit. And this time I'm going to go flush left on this caption. And now you can see a situation where we know this belongs to this and this this belongs to this because of the alignment. Just the sheer alignment tells us that these two paragraphs don't read together. This is talking about this, and this is talking about this. So it's kind of, the alignment is literally pointing to that direction. And this situation might come up a lot in small 3-panel brochures, when you do those little 3-panel brochures and you have photos and captions and things like that. This can also be, well, there's some other uses of the flush right alignment in small body copy, but this is just one of them here. So I guess my point is simply this, is understand alignments, understand the function of alignments, what it does to readability, when to use it, what's easiest to read, what's not easiest to read, and what you can fudge with, and what's more important. For instance, the magazine, uses justified type rather than flush left, ragged right, because, the overall look from a distance really is important to them. If you had the New York Times set like this, this would be disaster. So they're not going to do this. They're going to set it justified. There is a reason why you would choose an alignment, and that's another main point of all of this, is just know why you're using it. Okay, so that's alignment. Next is, we talked about readability and legibility, and that being, for the most part, very important in what we do. But understand that not everything that's on a page is important to read. It's easy to say that everything is important, that things should be legible and readable and so forth. But when you're talking about an ad, let's say, a car ad, and at the very bottom there's a disclaimer pretty much refuting everything in the ad, like your actual mileage may vary, taxes and license not included, right? They don't want you to read that stuff, but they have to legally put it in the ad. So they're going to put it way at the bottom, and they're going to put it in 5-point type so you can barely see it. And so I guess the point is that not everything is that important. And there's definitely a hierarchy of importance in what you're doing. And you want to understand that in terms of what size you choose for typography, your typeface, your alignment, all of those things should be determined based on the hierarchy. Okay, what is most important? What is next important? What is least important? And you can, make your decisions that way. Now, the legibility and readability issues of typography, these are things that have been, it's kind of scientifically been proven in terms of why certain people read flush left faster than, they actually did tests. And they had 2 people read the same copy, flush left and flush right, and they timed them. And they found that flush left, ragged right was the faster read in most cases. So that's something to know. That's something good to know as a designer whenever you're, so you're not just going up here to the alignment and just choosing any old alignment because it looks good. Positive and reverse type. Okay, we refer to it as reverse type because reverse type is a lot of times we refer to reverse type as white against black. And I'm going to turn this into white text, and I'm going to put this on top of this. Arrange this to the front here. Okay. And then I'll zoom in a little bit here so that we can see the difference between positive text and reverse text. Number one, this is your easiest read. And the easiest read in terms of color is black against white. Okay, you cannot get a faster, easier read. If you want people to read your text, make it black against white. It provides the most contrast, and you know what contrast is. It is the easiest on the eyes to read, and you can read this in mass. So any paperback book that you buy, any romance novel or whatever you read, is always black type against a white field. But reverse type is used, and used quite frequently. In fact, right now we're going through this dark mode, right? The dark mode. Everybody wants the dark mode, you know, in their interfaces. Everyone wants black and dark and gray and everything, right? The problem is that it's very hard on your eyes over time. So if you're staring at a computer screen and you're reading, you know, light type against a dark background, you're going to have a lot of strain on your eyes. And it's something that we've known for a long time. I like the look, actually. Aesthetically, it looks cool. You know, it's very dramatic, but it's very hard on the on your eyes. And I get headaches reading my phone all day long. You know, I'm just sitting there and it's like, you know, it's kind of a subconscious thing that happens. But anyway, white, dark type against a white background or light background is what's called positive text, and this is called reverse text. And this could be anything. This could be yellow against dark blue, so it doesn't have to be white against black. But it does create drama. You want to be very careful using it in body copy. Like you wouldn't want to, you know, print pages and pages in reverse type. And I've seen it done. I've seen this done, you know. Another thing is that you want to make sure that the text that you use is the typeface that you use is appropriate. So if you are going to use reverse type and you are going to use it in mass, I would use it in a font like a Times Roman, okay? I'm sorry that, you know, it's so common and so boring. But Times Roman provides serifs that are easier to discern so that you can, makes the legibility easier, you know, easier to read. We can read two I's, two capital I's next to each other, like in the word Hawaii, if they have serifs, that's no problem. But if it's sans serif, then it's two basically sticks next to each other. And that makes reading hard to read. The typical word was hillbilly. In fact, I'm going to set that word here just for the sake of it, just to prove a point that hillbilly, okay, has always been used as an example because we have all of these ascenders happening. We have an I stick. We have the two L's. Look at this one. We have an ILLB stem. Now, because of the serifs, this is easier to read than, let's say, if I went with a, you know, like a Helvetica, okay? And then we end up having this. Oops, sorry. Yeah, I'll just do Helvetica bold, yeah. Okay. Now, from when it's up big like this, it's no sweat to read. But if I took this down small, now that ILLB might get difficult to discern, legible, you know, in terms of legibility. So that's what we're talking about in terms of, you know. And then if I reverse this and put it against a black background, which I will do right now, I'll just highlight this and go here. And then go here. Oh, gotta bring it forward. I don't know my shortcut keys. Bring the front. Command Shift. Yeah. Okay. Now that becomes a challenge. Okay. even more so. So that's the point of reverse type versus positive type, sans serif versus serif in a reverse situation. Again, they've done studies, they've timed people, same copy, white against black, black against white, this one out in terms of the speed of reading. So should you never do this? No, not saying that, but again, be very conscious about that effect in your designs. So you're learning some stuff about typography, you know, some decisions that you might not have thought about. I think in today's day and age, we just kind of go up to our font menu, our typeface menu, and we just kind of scroll down and choose what we like, you know, without the knowledge of how it's affecting people's readability or legibility. Okay, regular, italics, and bold. Something that is, you know, the most common families of most typefaces. Most typefaces, you'll have those three things. You'll have the regular cut, you'll have the bold cut, and then you'll have an italic version of that. We can get into the origins of that, but for the most part, I'm not. I'll just say that the reason why those three are usually in most families is because the regular weight is usually used for body text. Bold weight is used for emphasis. So when you're designing type, and this module is actually called font design. But if you are designing a font, the first font that you're designing is the regular cut, or what we call the Roman cut. And the Roman cut is straight up and down. It's, you know, regular. You can just say it's regular. And that is Minion Pro regular. Okay, and that's the initial design. From this design, everything else is designed. And Minion has kind of an interesting family, kind of an extensive family. So from the regular, usually the next cut is the bold cut, and then the italic. And then from there, depending on, you know, this can get very extensive. I mean, Helvetica has over 80 different versions of it. Condensed, light condensed, you know, extra bold extended, heavy extended, and so forth. That's up to the type designer in terms of how many versions of this they feel were necessary. And this is something that's added on over time. Helvetica didn't always have that. But a lot of times there's a need for condensed versions of your typefaces and or extended versions. You want the same typeface, but you don't want to just bastardize it by using the, you know, percentage up here and just stretching it. So when you decide what font to use in your website or brochure or catalog, you really want to take into consideration the family and how much of that family do you feel that you're going to need in the development of that piece. If it's a catalog, and I think I showed you a photographic catalog the other day, the B&H photo catalog, that's over 400 pages of text and descriptions. And so you would want to choose a font that had a pretty extensive family, because you're probably going to be using lots of different versions of that font rather than using different fonts for different situations, which you don't want to do. So that's a big consideration, and that's usually one of the, you know, I mean, type designers have spent weeks in weeks in determining what font is going to be appropriate for a rollout of a campaign. But in any event, this is kind of some of the choices that you would have. Regular is, again, great body copy font. It's used in mostly situations of, say, 10-point type, 11-point type, and down. 10, 9, 8-point type are probably your most common font sizes in 8.5 by 11 format. So you'll see that mostly. 11 gets pretty big, 12-point gets really horsey. Horsey is another term that we used to use back in the day of basically body text that's way too big. Okay, it's cheap, it looks amateurish, and you don't need 12-point type in your design. 10-point type is sufficient. 11 sometimes, you're talking Reader's Digest for senior citizens. And hey, I have to admit, my eyes are not as good as they used to be. I am constantly having to read like this. And, I'm just getting old. And everyone's going to be there. And so you have to ask yourself, is this audience, you look at any kind of healthcare brochure, any kind of stuff in the doctor's office, and you'll see larger text settings. Bold for emphasis. There's all kind of typographic do's and don'ts for using bold, but bold is something that makes things stand out. So, minion bold is something that makes that stand out, and now we have a category that we're looking at. And a lot of things that we're seeing now is even taking this one step further and knocking it down to a percentage of gray and doing something like that. That is really popular, and it has been over the years. And we're able to print this. This used to be very difficult to print when we used to print offset and use halftone dot to create this out of black. But now this is gray, it's digital printing, and we can easily do this. So this is something that, you'll see, and it provides more of a contrast, because not only are you using light type against bold type, or this isn't not light, this is basically regular, but you're also increasing the contrast. And so that's making this stand out more. We do not need to necessarily make that bigger just because it's I'll see this done a lot. And, it's like, well, this is the heading and, this is the body and we need this to be, no, you don't need to do that. You'll see this in the flush left situation, for instance, if I go flush left with this, and then let's say this is a start, well, we might see something like that. And people think that they need to make that bigger than this. Well, they don't. This is 7-point type or 8-point type, and this can be 8-point type too. Same size, but the contrast is what's bringing your eye to it. So do those things. We can now do that. So regular italics and bold is something that you'll use constantly. Understand when to use it and how to use it. I hesitate to, and many designers will say the same thing of using bold text inside blocks of copy. For instance, doing things like this, right? Like that's important, so I need to bold it and I need to just shove it right in the middle of a paragraph. Well, what happens is, it is, your eye does go to it, but when you start doing that all over a block of copy, it gets, peppered with all of these spots, and it doesn't look good. And so if you want to bring emphasis to something, a better way to do that, a more subtle way to do that, what that might be? Go italic and go to the same, color as the rest of the copy. And what this does is that that italics simply mean that this is different than this. It just sets it apart. Like a lot of times you'll see italicized words after the name of a book, in other words, the author or something, or And all it does is say that this is different than this, but it's not that important up here. It's not that major black bold importance. Okay, so again, we're talking about kind of hierarchy and understanding when to use regular italics and bold. Okay, the next is caps and lowercase. Okay, and that's the kind of terminology that we use. It used to be called uppercase and lowercase, and we talked about those case drawers, right? We talked about the idea that at printers they had the case drawers when they used to do linotype and set text, hot metal text. The uppercase drawers were all the capital letters, the lowercase drawers were all the small letters. But it's brought, you know, pretty much caps and lowercase. LC is lowercase. So if you see that, you'll know what that means. Caps and lowercase is the most easiest form of type to read, whether it's serif or sans serif. So that might put an argument to rest. We want to set this block of copy in caps and lowercase rather than setting this in all caps. And I know that there's a small caps choice here. Oops. This is point size. I know that there was a small caps choice up here. I can't remember where it was, where you're instantly able to change. Oh, here it is. Okay, there we go. All right. So you might like the way this looks, and I know a lot of people do, using the all caps. Let me back out of this for a sec so we can kind of see that look. I did when I was in design school. Just about everything that I set was all caps, and they're, you know, it's just harder to read. And I'm going to give you the technical aspect of, or technical reason why this is hard to read. And I'm going to zoom in and show you how doing this now, the reason why this is hardest to read is because, and it looks cool because all of the tops of the letters are the same height and all the bottoms of the letters are the same height or rest on the same baseline. So you get this real nice even feel of letter forms. They're kind of like nice and neat. The spacing in between lines are nice and neat. Remember in justified text, right? We have that same kind of nice column spacing. Well, the problem with this, though, is that when everything is the same height, it becomes harder to discern each letter form because they're all the same height. We don't have what are called rivers and valleys in type. And I'm going to really zoom in on this to show you what, well, this isn't a valley. This is, let me give some text with a descender. Okay. Now, because we're scanning across a line and scanning across words, this becomes a legibility issue. We can discern this word faster than if it were all caps because as our eye comes across, it goes up and it comes down, and underneath it goes across and goes down. We know that's a G really quick. We know this is a T or an L or a B. And subconsciously, as we scan through letter forms, because of the way we read, we can discern this word rather than if it was all the same height, like this. And I think that kind of makes sense, especially when we're viewing this kind of small. Okay, we can read that, and we might have trouble reading that. Okay, especially if it's a long word. So caps versus caps and lowercase. Caps and lowercase is used in small body text as opposed to all caps. So we don't want to do that. And again, you'll see that. Boy, I'm at a loss here of finding this. Okay. Oops. Oh, that's small caps. Uh, that's not what we want. We want just turn that off there. Okay. Oops. I don't know. I'm messing up here. Sorry. I'm going to just turn all of this off. Turn small caps off. I don't know what I did, but anyway. Okay, so we want caps and lowercase for body text, but not all caps. Now, when do we use all caps? Well, we can use all caps again in that same situation where we don't have a lot of type, headlines, uh, emphasis. This line here could possibly be in all caps. We can get away with doing something like that. And then have caps and lowercase underneath. Because 3 words isn't going to be hard to read, but everything is going to be hard to read if we put everything in all caps. So that's my little, spiel about caps, and lowercase, when to use it, when to try and avoid it, and just kind of be conscious of that. Wow, it's 10:54 already, and we've pretty much, but we're done with this. And I thank you for sitting through 3 class sessions to hear my spiel on typography. But this is basic stuff, man. All designers need to know. And this is what sets you apart from that person that's just kind of, going up and setting text and not knowing what they're doing. And there are rules to follow in typography. And again, I think at the very beginning of all of this, I talked about how this is probably one of the most scrutinized skills that your portfolio is going to undergo when you go on an interview. They're going to look at your typography treatment, how you're dealing with, getting that written message across. So, like I said, my boss told me 8 years. It's going to take me 8 years to finally, for the light bulbs to go on and for me to see the light when it comes to typography. But, I think a lot of that was true. Something that you're going to deal with for forever. So, okay. So now, and I will have some other things to talk about for sure about typography, but I want to move into what, and I'm going to have a little quiz on this. Okay. The quiz, let me just tell you right now, will be very quickly. Let me just go back to my very first assignment on this, the first Zoom lecture. And this is everything that we've talked about. So if you went to the first Zoom lecture, we talked about the importance of typography, font, family, serif, leading, all of this stuff. And we ended today with caps and lowercase. So I will have a few questions on this topic here in a quiz. And just, an evaluation type thing that you absorbed it. They'll be pretty easy, pretty intuitive and self-explanatory, but I do make a point on you knowing this. And then I'm going to introduce the assignment, and I'll do that on Monday in our logos branding. Now, Daniel, can you make those Monday meetings?
Yeah, it was just this Monday.
Okay. And because we're only meeting once a week, I'm going to I'll lay that out for you on by Monday. I'll have it up by Monday, and then just go over it really quickly, and then we'll continue on with the branding class. And it's going to be a editorial layout, and it's going to involve kind of a neat topic, and I'll fill you in on that. That'll be a surprise. And it's going to be a grid system is going to be used. It'll be done in InDesign. You can use Photoshop for things that you feel you need Photoshop in. But InDesign will be the base program for this. And we'll talk about a little bit about setting up kind of flexible grids. This is pretty standard grid, but I don't know if you've worked with grids within grids before, and that's something that three-column grids are very common in editorial. Also, two-column grids are probably the most common, but three-column grids have been used. But if you divide into a 6-column grid, this is interesting for an 8.5 by 11 page. You have the flexibility of not only a 2-column grid, but also a 3-column grid and a 6-column grid. So if you look at the multiples of possibilities of setting up a 6-column grid, it gives you a lot of flexibility. We'll talk a little bit about that. But for now, that's it for today. So without any other, if you have any other questions, I will see you guys on Monday. And you're working on your logos, and I'll want to see some a final kind of list of how you're going to apply that logo, what collateral pieces you're going to put it on, and any possible mock-ups that you've collected. But basically type treatments on your logo, finished logo, so that we don't have to worry about that anymore. And we'll talk about that. Okay, so let me just stop my screen sharing and come over and look at the camera for a change. Look at myself, pin myself. I'm still getting used to this. And sign off, okay? So I'll see you guys on Monday.
All right. See you Monday.
See you Monday.
Take care.